states of Washington, Oregon, and California, and in Idaho and Nevada, which adjoin them, we can find perhaps a greater range of topography, of climate, of rainfall, and of crops than anywhere else in the world. This was a land of promise to the pioneers, and it's a land of accomplishment in the present day. Here, not far apart, we find the highest mountains and the arid and wind-blown deserts of sand or of sagebrush. Here are the last great forests of big timber, trees which were age-old when our maps first extended beyond the Mississippi. Fine stands of fir and hemlock, cedar, spruce, redwood, and pine. Clean, clear water gushing from these hillsides, a haven for wildlife and a retreat for the man who seeks the pleasures of the great outdoors. In part of this region of extreme contrasts, as much as 200 inches of rain a year causes the land to be lush with vegetation, while elsewhere only a few inches of rain makes water supply a critical problem, and irrigation is required. The picture changes rapidly in the West, where every acre is not like every other acre. There are hillsides and valleys covered with fruit trees, and pastures where fine dairy herds graze. Lights and shadows of sun and clouds disclose rolling slopes covered with grains and grasses. There are ranges abounding with livestock, stakes on the hoof, cows and cowboys heading for the old corral. Only a few decades ago in Western history, the native grasses covered vast areas of hills and valleys, and the hills were uncut by gullies. Before we had to plow for bread and graze cattle for meat, the natural cover held the soil. Before we had to clear the land for farms and hew trees for buildings, more of the land was in virgin timber. The rotting litter in deep woodland glades and the natural forest carpet of fern and moss held the moisture, and water seeped into the ground or trickled gradually down to the lowlands. In the West, for the most part, the good topsoil still remains. It is in these few inches near the surface that nature's soil factory is at work. It is only in this narrow layer, which varies in thickness, that rotting plant life puts back into the soil that nourishing richness which growing plants take out, and the good topsoil. But we seeded the hills to grain and fallowed the land, and the bare earth after harvest was exposed to the mercy of running water and gusty winds. We burned the stubble off the fields and destroyed the grain straw which would have held the soil. On the ranges, overgrazing by cattle and sheep used up the rich grasses, and millions of acres were taken over by sagebrush and weeds, by cactus and cheatgrass. There are other indications of what can happen to the good soil. Here we failed to provide for disposal of wastewater, and a gully 80 feet deep was formed in only a few years. Forest fires have exposed vast areas of our best timberland to washing. Many of these losses are the result of man's own carelessness. Wind, too, has taken its toll in dry land orchards and vineyards. There is nothing in this soil to bind it together. The wind moves the sand from place to place, and bared and dying roots are the result of lack of protective cover. We are losing the good topsoil from orchards where trees have been planted up and down hillsides. We are losing the good topsoil from the sloping grain fields. We may not notice a little silt washing down into the roadway, but every rain is taking it down relentlessly because there is nothing to stop it. Every drill mark running up and down hill provides a natural path for a soil-bearing rivulet each time it rains. Even in some areas where the topsoil is unusually deep, there is evidence of the gradual shift of soil downhill. Down the slope from the top of the hill, the rich topsoil is still quite deep. But as you go up the hill, the band of good productive earth above the subsoil narrows down to only half the depth. Sheet erosion like this is caused by every rain. Bald spots showing through on hilltops which were once dark with rich topsoil are clear indications of the constant loss. The good topsoil of Washington, of Oregon, the crop-growing surfaces of California, of Nevada, and of Idaho, washing down to form muddy banks below, and to silt up dams and reservoirs and highway ditches. The good earth of the West hurrying down to the sea. Water rushing down to the ocean cuts gullies on its way, and gullies are the last stage of this cancer on the land. Gullied land is difficult land to farm, and very often it becomes impossible to farm. We can't move on to greener pastures as did our forefathers. We are spending the land, and nature alone can't build it back in a century of time. Awake to the possibility of what can happen, we're taking steps to stop such losses. We're beginning to farm so as to make the best use of each acre according to its needs and adaptability. Farmers and federal and state agencies realize the need of a definite program of saving the soil. So we find groups of farmers joining together voluntarily in local soil conservation districts to work out programs which will obtain maximum permanent production. It's a neighborly, a truly American way of getting something done which needs badly to be done. Through these districts, farmers obtain the technical assistance of the Soil Conservation Service, the educational assistance of the state colleges, and help from other agencies. There are many ways in which conservation men work with farmers to solve individual problems. The total soil resources of the farm are inventoried on maps, and practical programs worked out for the best use of each part of the acreage. Engineers assist by devising means to control and dispose of water, or to spread water to more acreage. Some land requires a permanent drainage system as a first step in increasing its productivity. Some good bottom land needs an open ditch or tiling. Other conservation men bring knowledge of tested and proven practices which contribute to better land use. There is something in the program which applies to every farmer and rancher, whether he is grazing cattle on a vast area of rangeland or farming a half-acre plot of vegetables or flowers. To bloom and bear, all crops need the vital element, water. And so in the West, winter snows on the high mountains furnish the key to a supply of water for agriculture. For in this region of 5 western states lie half of all the irrigated lands of our nation. The supply, which will run down from the mountains each year, is estimated from the federal state snow surveys. Thus, where irrigation is necessary, the amount available is estimated in advance. Irrigation districts and farmers can plan how best to use it. When the water from the irrigation canals reaches the farmer's land, it is then up to him to make the most efficient use of his allotted share. Leveling uneven land is one step toward better irrigation, for it permits even distribution of the water. Wherever it's practical to level the land, it will result in less labor, more even penetration of water into the soil, and more uniform crops. Whether the farmer employs ditches and furrows, or portable pipes or sprinkler systems, flat land will contribute to the ease of farming. How much water to use is then the farmer's problem. The Soil Conservation Service aids him by studying the entire acreage and determining the time and rate of application which will give maximum benefit without waste to each part of the field. These studies have been brought down to a fine science, and the good irrigator takes advantage of such tests and then keeps a close check on how the water is penetrating his soil. He avoids waterlogged fields and loss of soil through excessive runoff by limiting his use of water to the times when the soil becomes dry enough to absorb it evenly to the proper depth. Where the land is sloping, the good irrigator always plants and irrigates across the slope stop his soil from washing. He controls every outlet from the head ditches or flumes. Water runs downhill of its own accord, and moving water carries soil. Trickling water seeps in, so the good irrigator makes his pattern of furrows so that the water has short runs along gentle grades. Even where grades are extremely slight, it pays to follow contour lines when furrowing for irrigation. Permanent grade lines are easily maintained in orchards by various methods of marking trees. Thus, the annual furrows can be set up by simply following the route which is indicated by the markings on the trees. Another good conservation practice in fruit culture is the use of cover crops to enrich the soil and to prevent the ground from washing during winter rains. Many types of cover crops, varying with local soil and water conditions, are used. But legumes are favorites in many sections because they're good soil building agents. On their roots are small nodules of bacteria which gather nitrogen from the air and put it into the ground. When the cover crop is disked in the spring, the operation leaves most of the vegetation at the surface and roughens and loosens the soil. The decaying plants and their roots form a rich humus. Thus, a natural soil and chemical factory is set up close to the surface. In this factory, nature makes plant foods available to feed the tree roots. In many vineyards which were clean-tilled, the good humus was exhausted, the soil structure broken down, and the surface subjected to blowing. But under a new policy, vetch or other valuable cover crops are planted each year after the old vines are trimmed, holding the sandy soil in place and providing a good new surface mulch. The value of decaying vegetation is especially well illustrated in the woods, where the ground litter decomposes and forms a good protective cover. Copious rainfall and rich forest soil make the Pacific timberland one of the world's fastest growing tree farms. Out of the duff and through the fern, little seedlings spring up by the million. Fine stands of timber provide many farmers with trees which can be cropped like any other product of the soil. The farmer who manages his farm forest to produce a good crop from time to time marks the trees to be cut on a selective basis. He harvests the trees when they're mature, to be hauled out to the mills for use as lumber or pulp or plywood. This is sound